Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, a crowd-driven feature where we respond to your questions on economics, on political philosophy, on literature, on foreign policy and war, on all those things that concern us in our common life together as citizens.
All right, here's Jeff asking about the origins of the Second World War. That's a book by British historian A.J.P. Taylor, and it argues that Hitler, far from having a grand strategic plan for world conquest, had in fact a moderate foreign policy similar to most German politicians at the time and did not intend to start a major European war. And Jeff's asking, is that a reasonable view?
No, that is a profoundly unreasonable view. Let me emphasize here, Taylor is no neo-Nazi. He's no apologist for Hitler. What he is a very successful popular historian, wonderful writing style, who had written an extremely influential book on the First World War that helped to shape popular understanding. It persuaded me for decades that the war had been a piece of monumental stupidity, political, strategic, and tactical, that it was the work of generals and politicians too callous and stupid to realize they were sending a generation to slaughter for nothing. And that is very important to his views on the Second World War as well, because it is true that many of Hitler's aims were similar to those of other German politicians in the 20s and 30s. Unfortunately, what they wanted to do was reverse the outcome of the First World War. They wanted to secure Germany its place in the sun, as the Kaiser had sought prior to the First World War. And this view rather whitewashes Germany's geopolitical ambitions before the First World War also. Germany's desire to expand its power and influence was genuinely menacing to the free societies in Britain, France, even in the Americas. The German desire to dominate the landmass of Europe and the high seas really was threatening to liberty. And the Kaiser should not get a free pass here. The Kaiser was not Hitler, but he was an aggressive man with contempt for political liberty. And, in fact, believe it or not, in exile in the Netherlands after the First World War, he did suggest at one point that the Jewish question ought to be settled, perhaps using poison gas. So he is one of history's great villains. It was his policies more than anything else that started the First World War, and they were aggressive policies. And so, yes, Hitler, like many German politicians, wanted to reverse Germany's defeat in the First World War and once again menace liberty. Hitler's agenda, of course, was considerably more sweeping and insane. And it's true, he may not have had a grand strategic vision in the sense that he hadn't planned out every move. He didn't know how events would turn out. But he did have an approach, a consistent approach of aggressive exploitation of opportunity, always seeking belligerence. He had some kind of sense of timing, though not much of one. He really only had one forward gear. And it was inevitable, as it was before World War I, either that he would conquer or win by forcing unilateral surrender, or else that war would come in defense of freedom. And so one way of looking at the problem, I always say, and this was driven home to me very strongly when I made the documentary on World War I back in 2014, before you condemn the generals and politicians for the choices that they made between 1914 and 1918, ask yourself, what would I have done differently? After Germany attacked its neighbors, would I have said, oh, that's fine, you just keep it? If not, what tactical or strategic options would I have employed to get the Germans off the very favorable positions they'd occupied during their advance in the fall of 1914? How would I have fought the war better than these supposed idiots? This question is very hard to answer. And as to Taylor's thesis about the 1920s and 1930s, suppose that you were a British Prime Minister in that period, and you believed the Taylor thesis, that, yeah, the Versailles settlement at the end of World War I was too harsh. It sowed the seeds of future conflict. We should try to meet Germany's legitimate demands for fairer treatment, for a reduction of some of the terms, restoration of some of the territory that was taken away from them. Suppose you believed all that, what would you have done? And I think the answer is you'd have done very much what Neville Chamberlain and the French leadership did. Partly they were simply so horrified by the thought of another war, but partly they thought, well, some of what Germany's asking for really is kind of legitimate. Look, everybody in Germany wants it, and not entirely unreasonably. And if you'd done what Taylor suggests, you'd have gotten exactly the same result that these well-meaning but deluded people did, which is a series of small surrenders that, far from moderating Hitler's demands, caused them to become more aggressive, culminating in his deal with Stalin in the summer of 1939 and the outbreak of a general European war in September in very unfavorable conditions. So, Taylor is a superb writer. He's very convincing. He's charming. He's witty. He's compelling. But his thesis about the coming of World War II is wrong. And it's wrong because his thesis about World War I is also wrong. And the two are intimately connected.
All right. Well, thanks for that. And thanks for your question, Jeff. Folks, if you would like to play along and ask your question of the professor, go to the URL on your screen and everything there will be explained. Thanks, and see you next time.